Cyberwork listeners, I have important news before we dive into today's episode. I want to make sure you all know that we have a lot more than weekly interviews about cybersecurity careers to offer you. You can actually learn cybersecurity for free on our Infosec skills platform. If you go to infosecinstitute.com/free and create an account, you can start learning right now. We have 10 free cybersecurity foundation courses from podcast guest Keytron Evans, 6 cybersecurity leadership courses from also podcast guest Cicero Chimbanda, 11 courses on digital forensics, 11 courses on incident response, 7 courses on security architecture, plus courses on DevSecOps, Python for cybersecurity, JavaScript security, ICS and SCADA security fundamentals, and more. Just go to infosecinstitute.com/free and start learning today. Got it? Then let's begin today's episode. Today on Cyberwork, I welcome Moshe Zioni of Apiiro to talk about threat research and how to properly report discovered code vulnerabilities. We discuss the ways that vulnerabilities can find their way into code despite your best intentions, the difference between full disclosure and responsible disclosure, and what it was like to be in the last generation to still grow up before the internet changed everything. All this and plenty more today on Cyberwork. Welcome to this week's episode of the Cyberwork with Infosec podcast. Each week, we talk with a different industry thought leader about cybersecurity trends, the way those trends affect the work of Infosec professionals, while offering tips for breaking in or moving up the ladder in the cybersecurity industry. Moshe Zioni has been researching security for over 20 years in multiple industries, specializing in penetration testing, detection algorithms, and incident response. A constant contributor to the hacking community, and has been a co-founder of the ShabbatCon Security Conference for the past 6 years. So today's topic is loosely based around the ethics of threat research and vulnerability reporting, and how to do that in a way that makes you look like the hero and not the black hat. So Moshe, thank you for joining me today. Welcome to Cyberwork.
Hi, and thank you, Chris, for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, what got you interested in computers and tech originally? What was your origin story? Were you a computer kid? Did you come to it later in life?
Pretty much so. A computer kid. Once I'm a '90s kid. Like I was born in '83.
Okay.
And through the '90s, as you might know, or the listeners can know, the '90s were pretty hectic in terms of internet. So once the internet went on, everything changed, and it was like amazing to see from the sideline. And I want to join as an intellectual interest. I was back then in junior high, and this was like my first steps into the hacker community.
So you're like at that exact point where you still have a before and after sense. Like you sort of were familiar with life before the internet, and then you saw like it take off and blow up. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
that's really cool. I want to talk a little bit about some of your previous experience with some of my guests. Looking at your LinkedIn profile can reveal a series of pivots or changes or transformations between industry. But with you, Moshe, an awful lot of your career journey has been laser focused specifically on penetration testing and threat research. So for listeners who are in the initial stages of being future pen testers or threat researchers, can you speak about the different points at which you leveled up your skills in the realms of pen testing, some of the big projects or opportunities you grabbed a hold of, and how these made you a better threat researcher?
Wow, that's a great question. So it's important to know that there were several shifts within the industry throughout the years. So if I began my professional journey around 2005,
okay.
Since then all the industry have been changing and shifting all the time. So this also speaks to what kind of penetration testing jobs and InfoSec jobs in general were present to me and others as well. Mm-hmm. Luckily for me and the others in the industry, there was a place for our talent. So this was like the first initiation of those kind of industries, and everything. Because of that, it was shaped around that. So skills were very different from each other. Everyone came with a different set of skills because everyone had a different set of, I would say, experiments and and something that they find themselves doing in 2 a.m. without noticing. So part of it, to your question, I think that the most important thing for me especially was to go broad. Like not to be focused on a single technology or a single tactic that you just use it as a hammer or everything looks like nails.
Right.
But to go very, very broad, if it's infrastructure, if it's operating system, if it's encryption, malware, insert response at times. And by that, I think it gave me a lot of, first of all, first-hand experience, but also ever ignited my passion for security or ever again. So I wasn't bored for a second. If I was bored for one specific case, I could put it to rest and start something else adjacent to that. So I think that this is the most crucial thing in penetration testing is to go broad, because if you are looking at through a pinhole, you will be the best and the sharpest knife in the drawer. But once you have something off your scope and something that you need to take advantage of, you won't be even noticing that. So I won't say that there is no place for sharpener knives. Of course there is, but at least have some kind of perception to the other realms as well. So you'll be able to connect the dots and to complement that with, of course, more research and more education towards the ones needed.
That lines up with something that I discussed with a previous guest. Gemma Moore is a pen tester in the UK, and she was saying for people who started this type of work in the late 90s and early 2000s, that you didn't have these prepackaged pen testing tools, and on one hand, like a lot of that sort of automated aspect of it makes it easier to go deeper and get more specialized. But the thing that she really appreciated about this time, and it sounds like that's the case with you as well, is that there were less tools, but you had to be better at them and you had to do a lot more lateral thinking. Does that sort of line up with your experience of those days?
Absolutely. Yeah, she put it very, very nicely. Yeah.
So as I mentioned, today's topic, we're going to talk specifically about code vulnerability, the proper process for emergency patching, and the ethics of security research. So let's start with some basic parameters. What are the types and some common examples of code vulnerabilities that we're speaking about here? What are the fundamental errors or problems that you like to discuss?
Again, this is a very broad question. I'll try to be to answer it generally. And by that, let's start with the basic building stones of every kind of vulnerabilities are what kind or what realms that those vulnerabilities exist in. Of course, if you are looking at encryption mechanisms, you have a different vulnerability types than, I would say, building a front end for a website, maybe, or maybe a back end. So this is these are some variables that comes from whatever programming languages are you using.
Okay.
I won't go into the details of why, but in general, different programming languages have different aspects of mechanisms for protection, and some of them are prone to those to one type of exploitation and not the other, or maybe less prone, I should say. And some technologies inherently are devised by, as I said, encryption mechanism, for example. Those kind of exploitations are more on the side of there are, like, for example, side channel attacks for encryption, or maybe mathematical attacks for the encryption mechanism by definition. So maybe to answer your question, and it's a very hard one, I would say, there are some implementation vulnerabilities, like the way you coded the actual solution to your problem is wrong, and maybe you didn't consider something memory-wise or CPU-wise or maybe storage-wise or permission-wise. And the other one is I would say algorithmics. Like if there is a mathematical challenge there and you haven't got to that, this is a different type of vulnerabilities overall.
I see. Now, is this the sort of thing where implementing, we offer secure coding and so forth? Is this a failure in, not a failure, but is this an error or an issue in, just sort of working too quickly with the programming language and not sort of like, dotting your I's and crossing your T's in terms of like all of the safety on the back end. Like where do you see this come from? Is this lack of experience? Is this just not being used to, when you make this particular thing, make sure you close up this back end, or make sure you seal this access hole or whatever?
So we can talk about the common problems with why non-secure code exists, but in general, of course, bugs exist because people are writing code. Yeah. Once you write a program, no matter how expert you are presenting bugs to the code base that you have.
Sure.
By that, security bugs are not different. Everyone will contribute sometime in their lives some security bugs into their programs, no matter what. Now, why it's happening, it really depends on, as you said yourself, on the expertise and security inclination of the person that is going to write that. But also, you can't know it all. So if there is something like, if the technology have been changing and you haven't paid attention to a specific maybe corner case that you should be aware of, or didn't take something that is very obscure but can happen sometimes, it's very, very hard to tackle, just because it's very hard to think about. And of course, as you said, the stress of time will also take effect. So if you have 2 days to write something that should take you 2 days, it doesn't mean that you write it perfectly. If you had maybe 2 weeks, it will maybe be better,
but closer.
But nonetheless, yeah. But won't be perfect, because that's the way we are.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. And I mean, you only have to look at how many times you have to update this or that browser or program because they found yet another thing. So that's just sort of a part of life now. But so once a vulnerability has been found in a piece of code, can you speak about the sort of in-depth research process that follows? What's the chain of inquiry that you're creating to get to the bottom of something like this?
So I can speak of several vulnerabilities that we found throughout the career. Maybe the most recent one was a vulnerability that allowed us to read, I would say, passwords and secrets on a system. So basically, what happened there is that what intrigued us is two things. First of all, we understood the environment. We understood where those kind of programs are living at. This is a very specific program named Argo CD. Which is part of the way that code is being built today. Modern code is being built by systems like Argo CD. And we understood the environment, where the code lives, what kind of parameters are getting in, what is the danger, what are the most precious jewels that you need to protect from.
Yes.
And by that, we started to look at the code base and to understand what a code base means to do, and what is the meaning behind it, what is the implementation, maybe limitations by that. One specific thing that caught our eye is, of course, we tried to find the term for that, the tech term is that sinks and sources. So you're looking for where you can input some data, like the source itself, and the sink is where the data goes through and it finally finds home in a vulnerable maybe code. Yeah. So through that, once you find something, you can start from the sinks, you can start from the sources, because it's a very massive body of work. You need to understand the code. If this is more than a few files, it will be difficult to navigate through and to understand where the code flows and where the data flows. Yeah. So in our case, we started in this case by the sinks themselves. So we found a way of that was a bit, I would say, fishy, of looking at the data itself. So we found it to do something that is beyond the expected value, something like reading a file that is not supposed to be under a directory there. And we understood that if you can maybe hop to another file, you'll be able to read those kind of secrets that we are talking about. And furthermore, something that was I won't say a red flag, but something that, as for someone like me, as a researcher, to see that screams, check this out, which is something that was specifically anti this kind of attacks. So some part of the code was specifically built for defending from the attack that we expected to find, which was very interesting and telling about the expertise that the programmers that wrote the code had, because they understood there is a problem that can be a problem. So this was the start. So we started there. We started to dissect exactly what does it mean, to understand how the program works and how the kind of defenses or walls that was put up were working. And then you are trying to, through that, you are trying to push a needle. You try to see what kind of unexpected results or unexpected inputs can be thrown at the system, but evade this kind of mechanism that was pushed out. And eventually we followed the sources, as we said, what kind of inputs we can give that, and what kind of inputs will go through this kind of processing, and what will evade this kind of processing. And we found exactly that, a input that the programmer expected to go through the processing and to go through the filter and to be checked. But we found a input that was at the same time, legit input, which the program can read, but the program was confused by it enough to bypass completely the protection that was built. So the process itself, I guess, that goes a full circle.
Now, when you're able to sort of discover this type of this issue, as you said, where there's this level of complexity that it's simply bypassing and just spitting out the results here, is this something that you're able to prescribe a remedy to this, or simply by the act of saying we found it, this is what it's doing, that they're able to sort of like correct the code themselves?
So both. In this case, they were very cooperative. The programmers and developers that we reported to, and this is also go to the ethics. I won't do any kind of an expert won't go and tell everyone about this kind of exploit, because it's very dangerous, before disclosing it to the developer to see if they can fix that together. And in this case, they were very the triage them itself, the process of understanding what this kind of problem can do and what is the broader impact of that, was very, very quick by them. And they started immediately to remediate. We started to discuss other variations maybe of the attack, so to cover more ground on that. And so that was a very open discussion, and a very good one, I should say. I've been through tens, if not hundreds, of those kind of vulnerability disclosures, and this was one of the best that I found. And through that, to your question, sometimes you are the one that is recommending remediations, and sometimes it's a cooperation, and in some cases you don't even need to say so. But the minimum thing that for me is that at least be able to suggest remediation and to at least try to have this kind of conversation, which is very important for any kind of researcher to have.
Yeah. Now, the particular example you used transitions nicely into my next question here. So I want to ask if you can speak to the proper method and channel of reporting vulnerabilities to a vendor, because on a past episode of the podcast, I spoke to Connor Gregg in the UK, who now famously had a story about how he received a string of passwords and data from McDonald's after winning a contest prize. When they sent him his prize via email, they ended up sending out their entire sort of access. And he spent a frantic weekend trying to find someone at corporate. They didn't have a bug bounty program, so he spent like 24 hours trying to find someone to report it to. And he had to call the US, and then they had to give him the number for the UK. So can you tell me about what needs to happen at the reporting level? Because I know that an improper reporting can either cause you to be ignored by the company or even be perceived as a threat. So what channels should you use, and what tone should you take, and how can you ensure that your findings aren't treated as the work of a pest or even an active threat?
Oh, so this may be the most substantial transition that the industry went through throughout the 20 or maybe 30 years, maybe more, was the standardization of disclosure mechanisms. Yes. And by that, the thing that through the 90s, I've rarely disclosed, unless it was anonymous, disclosed a vulnerability to an organization just because of the threat of legal over your head. Especially as a kid, I didn't want to go through that. Understandably, I think. Yes. But also, so back then I tried to do that anonymously, and several times it was successful. Which was great achievement by itself. And today you have much more legal mechanisms in place to be able to confront that without the threat of legal action. That said, it still happens. So this is also something that we are working on, everyone are working on, and the community is concerned with, to see that this kind of the general term is responsible disclosure versus full disclosure. We can also, maybe if you would like to go through the differences there.
Absolutely, that's the next question, yeah. Okay, go ahead. Please continue.
So responsible disclosure. So of course, without nitpicking, because there is a lot to say about the debate around responsible disclosure and what is responsible to begin with. But in general, this is a mechanism that you have an agreement, or the organization in question has some kind of a statement of, we are accepting those kind of disclosures. This is the way to go through that. And as I said, throughout the 20, maybe 15 years, this was an explosion of options there, especially around bug bounties that even took that a step further, and standardizing the way that you should communicate with a third, or maybe a mediator instead of the organization itself, and to have this kind of triage with I would say their names, HackerOne and Bugcrowd. They are the two big ones that have an amazing job of making this kind of mediation between the researchers, hackers, and the organizations themselves. So sometimes this goes through bug bounty programs. Sometimes it goes through a way of, something went off. Excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
You can hear me still?
I can still hear you. Yes, no problem.
Okay, just let me. Excuse me, Chris.
No problem.
Okay. So there is the bug bounty programs that this is one way to go through that. There are some cases that you should find, at least look for a security page that will explain to you what kind of process they look for. In the Argo CD option, they had a wiki page, because this is a GitHub hosted repo. So on the wiki page, they said, if you have any kind of security advice or security disclosure, please contact this email. Which also, as a very good example, maybe they will also define what are the minimum aspects of the disclosure that they would like to have in order to have a healthy conversation around that, and not just being bombarded by claims of, this is vulnerable, go fix it, without too much of a conversation. Right. Which also the number one, I would say, a reason for an organization to go through bug bounty programs is to have this kind of triage and to have the minimal set of legal expectations from all sides as well. And a different, maybe the downside of responsible disclosure is once it doesn't work. For your example, I can feel it very, very closely. I had, without disclosing any names, a vulnerability of a bypass nature on a very major company. Something that you at least 30% of your audiences have on their desktops. Okay. And I tried to contact their. It was a very specific program within this kind of ecosystem. I tried to contact this big company. No one answered. I tried many emails, many people that I tried to go through, and nothing happens. A couple of months later, there was an M&A of this specific organization. So I tried to contact the new organization. Nothing happened. It went like that for years. I've never disclosed it because I didn't find a way. And I think that by now it's fixed because they moved through a couple of iterations of code reviews and a complete overhaul of the code itself.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I'm still not quite clear on the distinction between full disclosure and responsible disclosure. So could you give me, I kind of understand responsible disclosure now, but what's the what are you doing if you're doing full disclosure? Is it basically you're saying I found this vulnerability, and you're sort of telling the general public, and then sort of by extension you're kind of making them look like a target to potential attackers? Is that what that means?
Yeah, so this kind of method is, as you said, is just going public with it and with full details. So in hope of, I won't say this is not a chaotic. Usually, the researchers, if they are respected enough, they're not doing that in intention of getting attention. If they are doing so, usually doesn't receive so well by the community itself. So ethically, we are striving to have a responsible disclosure, any kind of responsible disclosure first. But if it goes to hell or it doesn't work, there are some researchers that succumb to full disclosure, which means public disclosure. Everyone knows about it now, and now maybe the organization will do something, and the public pressure will make it stall. There is maybe some kind of something in between, like several responsible disclosures will actually have a deadline. Like if you are not if you are not trying to fix that, or we don't have a good sight into the future of when it's going to be fixed, we're going to disclose it nonetheless, let's say after 90 days after disclosure. So this is maybe some kind of a middle ground that some researchers have found.
Yeah. Do you have any sense of whether a full disclosure? I mean, because that seems like kind of like the nuclear option in the sense of, and I can't imagine that, the shame that would be associated with that would necessarily do the trick. I mean, do you have a sense of whether like just going public with it has resulted in positive results? Does it happen a lot still, or are companies starting to get the hint and sort of offer channels for quietly disclosing?
But by positive results, you mean it was fixed? I guess. So if this is the measurement, yes, several times by full disclosures, we saw this kind of very quick turnaround. And even if the vulnerability was nothing, like something that you shouldn't be very, very bothered about, but still the public pressure does it stall. The issue is, of course, there is in those kind of quote unquote successful attempts of full disclosure, this is also a very common ground for attackers to exploit that before the fix is there. So there are some very dangerous implications to this kind of full disclosure. So I won't recommend going nuclear, as you said, just from the beginning of it at least.
Yeah. And I suppose there's also the third way that, we don't like to talk about is, there's a full disclosure, responsible disclosure, and then selling the vulnerability to the black market or whatever. I mean, that's the one you don't want. And that's the one that they're most afraid of. But now that makes sense. I guess when I think of, we're going to go public with your vulnerability, that, it's like, well, you're not getting the bug bounty. Someone, they're going to take care of it, but they're not going to roll out the red carpet for you next time. So, so I want to talk about, the purpose of the show is to help people break into the industry, learn about this type of work and these types of careers and so forth. So as chief security researcher, what are some of the main security threats and threat actors that you're currently researching and dealing with? Are there particular trends or issues or threat actors that keep you awake at night right now?
Absolutely. So I'm focused on something called SDLC, or Software Development Lifecycle. The extension of that is what is called today supply chain attacks, which you can think of it as a maybe real world supply chain, which means your goods are going to go through several hands before it being received by you. It's not that different in software. So you have so many dependencies in software that will make it, you are dependent upon either services or packages or even code. That was written by others, a third party, then you should trust sometime, because without that you usually cannot write any kind of extensive programs. And by that, this is a very modern and also very vivid, very livid area of attacks right now. So you have so many people, instead of attacking you on your computer and sending you phishing emails in order to hook you in, they will try to maybe go to your third party, attack them as some kind of a contractor, maybe some kind of a dependency repository, will hack them, will introduce malicious code, and by that you will voluntarily pull this kind of code to your computer and run it without any kind of suspicion, which is why these kind of attacks are very lucrative, because you are going to run it because you asked to run this kind of executed code on your machine. And your chances of dealing with that right now is slim, because you won't have much of the mechanisms to protect against it are not still there, at least not in the grand scheme of things. So to your question, that's where I'm focusing my efforts today. So, and that's what we are doing in Apiiro as well, to come with solutions to those kind of attacks, and to, first of all, to proactively defend against it, and to also detect those kind of attacks before it really hits the ground. And that's a thing that I've never rested. I'm not resting about. I'm not there yet. We have a lot of information to share, and the detections that we produce are honestly, and of course, I'm very objective here, are great. Nonetheless, the attackers will also try to their best to overcome those kind of detections. So this is, of course, not an ending story there.
Right. Yeah. And I imagine that's a harder access point for a hacker to get into, but the rewards are so much larger, because if you're adding that vulnerability into something that's going to disseminate amongst tens or hundreds of thousands of people, then you have a heck of a lot bigger payday than if you're just focused on sending, as you said, that one phishing email to that one CEO, and they might not even notice it or delete it.
Yeah. And the attacks that we have seen in the wild through the past years are so devastating, in effect, that you can't really you can't really put it aside. You have to deal with it. And also the U.S. government lately have been published an executive order specifically on supply chain attacks, because this is a very concerning attacks for anyone, specifically for the U.S. government, but also, of course, to every kind of industry out there.
Yeah. Now, what is the day-to-day work of security researcher like? I mean, how much of your day is spent responding to discoveries in the news, or acting on the concerns of vendors, or just going out on your own and researching whatever might be coming next? What's your day structured like?
There is no structure, I have to say. But in general, as a lead of researchers themselves, I'm trying to keep a balance between their, I would say, agnostic research and their detection and product value research. So I honestly believe that researchers are thriving in a research environment that gives them the intellectual freedom to invest their time and efforts into something that they are really passionate about, and not something that is just burning right now, not always something that is just burning. There is, of course, a very good virtue on going through a very immediate concern that need to be tackled, which happened to be today. We had like a vulnerability that was published, and all the community, including ourselves as well, have been putting our eyes into that and trying to scan the code. There is a Spring-based framework that was allegedly being found with the vulnerability. So usually I'm trying to keep this kind of balance and freedom for the researchers, including myself. And by that, I don't have a specific number for you, unfortunately, to say 75%, 25%.
Yeah, sure.
But something along the lines that you should be at least productive and find the time to do a substantial amount of work on each. Not something like an hour a week just for an agnostic research, like something much more substantial than that.
Yeah. You need to really be sort of on top of all the things that are happening in addition to whatever you're doing in your own work.
Yeah.
So for people who are, from a work standpoint, for people who are listening, who are looking to get their foot in the door, do you have any tips or advice for students of cybersecurity or career aspirants who want to work in either threat research or pen testing? Are there, obviously it's different from when you started in 2005-ish. What are some experiences or self-initiated projects they should be engaging in now to make them more desirable to potential employers?
Wow. Let me just structure it a bit.
Sure.
I would maybe split it into three. First of all, find your passion. Your immediate passion. What makes you really interested about knowing about how something is working? What is behind the the screen there, and what can be learned from that? Go ahead and learn that. Be driven by your passions, because that's exactly what keeps you awake, and this is something that you won't be bored by. And keep in mind that some of that will be over the top. You won't be able to learn it by a day, but have this kind of patience to learn this kind of things, maybe for more than a few months or so. You can take even courses on those kind of subjects, but this is really, I saw hundreds of researchers and led many of them. And so it very varies between each researcher. Some will say, I would love to see like YouTube videos and then try myself. I'd like to go through a full-on course academically, maybe, or maybe somewhere else. Like an online course, and by that try to understand as much as I can, and to write books. Myself, as an old school person, I like to read books as well.
Yes.
But nonetheless, this is the second part. Leave a space for actual experimentation and hands-on. Without that, everything that you learn and everything that you learn about and you hear about will go moot, and you have to have this kind of either muscle memory for your actions and for your attacks, and to be able to actually find something, maybe in variation, new first, and then actually new. The third thing I would say is that in order to thrive as a researcher, you have to go outside your comfort zone. Once you feel very, very comfortable and you are not feeling like, I would say, even frustrated a bit, or not a bit.
Yes.
This means that something that you are learning something that someone else already learned, and this is okay. This is more than okay. You should go through that. But at least once you are trying to research something, know that frustration is part of the deal. You have to deal with something that no one understood before, no one succeeded in before. Maybe it's a code snippet you didn't succeed in. Maybe it's an exploit you can try it. But you will. If without this kind of endurance, the whole industry won't be there. So these are maybe the three parts I think that makes a good researcher, and without being specific to a specific realm or expertise.
That's fantastic advice. I read something along that line, that you should be sort of aiming to be learning at a point where you're just about in over your head, but not quite. Like you should be sort of struggling, but not completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up today, Moshe, can you tell me about your company, or the company you work for? Is it Apiiro?
Apiiro, yeah.
Apiiro. And can you talk about some of the services you offer your clients and some of the updates or big things you're looking forward to working on or showing us in 2022?
Yeah, sure. So Apiiro is a startup. The startup itself has gone out of stealth in October 2020. Since then, we won even a couple of prizes. If it's the RSA innovation from last year, we were number one in their roster. And in general, we are producing software to protect against, to have this kind of visibility into your software development lifecycle and supply chain aspects of the SDLC itself. By that, we are providing visibility to our customers first to what is residing within the actual inventory and applications and servers that you have. Maybe it's a cloud-based servers as well, so Kubernetes, cloud-native applications. Second, to observability, we also give you the context for those kind of risks. So we are combining different aspects of the risks that are residing within your applications or implementation of applications, and trying to give you a whole spectrum of what the risk means. Let's say you have a code, the code found to be vulnerable. It doesn't really say, or the code is being committed to the repository of the code base. And by that, it really, if you go through a tool and it will say, maybe there is a vulnerability there, it won't say much without the context. So we are processing the code. We are understanding the behavior of the developer to see if the behavior is eccentric or maybe anomalous to the different developers or a specific developer group that is in mind. And by that, with this kind of context and others, we are combining that to a single risk to have a single pane of risk structure within your application base. Second, we are measuring those kind of remediation and those kind of application security program that you have. By measurement, I mean that you have actual data to perceive, and by that, indicators of success to yourself. You can also combine different indicators to be able to produce indicators by your own, maybe something customized to your own organization. And lastly, remediation. Once you have this kind of visibility and you have this kind of measurements, you also try to remediate. So we are giving you the options to remediate, and we are working through that process with you with different vulnerability types, with different aspects of security. If, as I said before, especially if you are developing rapid development practices, you will find that this kind of remediation will be very, very fast. Will need to be very, very fast, and we are providing something that is being called by the industry a shift left, meaning that we believe that if you are remediating that kind of vulnerabilities as soon as possible in the development chain, the cost for that and the effort for that will be minimal. And by that, we are providing this kind of shift left even to the design level before any kind of code has been written. Gotcha. So all of that is being combined into Apiiro, and that's basically it.
Very good. Well, thank you again for your time, Moshe. This has been a really great discussion. I have one last question for you. If our listeners want to learn more about Moshe Zioni or Apiiro, where should they go online?
I'm mostly active on LinkedIn and Twitter under the name Dalmoz, Dalmoz. If they want to contact me personally, Moshe @Apiiro. This is APIIRO. This is .com. Feel free to contact me. I'll be more than happy to have a conversation with you.
Oh, wonderful. So, Moshe, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a really, really great talk, and I appreciate it.
Chris, it was amazing. Thank you very much.
As always, I'd like to thank everyone who has been listening to, watching, and supporting the show. New episodes of the Cyberwork podcast are available every Monday at 1 p.m. Central, both on video at our YouTube page and on audio wherever you get your downloads. I want to make sure that you all know that we have a lot more than weekly interviews about cybersecurity careers to offer. You can also actually learn cybersecurity for free on the Infosec skills platform. If you go to infosecinstitute.com/free and create an account, you can start learning right now. We have 10 free cybersecurity foundation courses from past podcast guest Ketron Evans, as well as cybersecurity leadership, digital forensics, incident response, DevSecOps, Python for cybersecurity, JavaScript security, ICS and SCADA security fundamentals, and more. Again, just go to infosecinstitute.com/free and start learning today. Thank you very much once again to Moshe Zioni and Apiiro, and thank you all so much for watching and listening. We will speak to you next week.